Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us at the Suphan Center's Global Security Forum. I'm Kevin Barron. I'm your moderator for the next about an hour. I'm the Executive Director of Defense One, a news and ideas website and news brand at covering the Pentagon and national security issues across the spectrum. And I'm pleased to have my first guest today, none other than John Allen, familiar to all of you, I'm sure, president of Brookings Institution, as well as retired general, former NATO ISAF commander in Afghanistan, former global counter-ISIS envoy, former deputy MNF commander in Iraq, and a whole lot of other formers, perhaps. But maybe one day Brookings will be a former. Who knows what's next for John Allen? But we thank him for joining us with a little bit of our late rescheduling. I know a lot of you were looking forward to an interview with Chris Krebs earlier this morning. Obviously, with events going on, that didn't come to fruition. So we wish him well, but we have General Allen now, and then later in the hour, former CIA Director John Brennan joining us to talk about those issues. So I'm actually very excited to talk to you today, John, because a lot has happened on our beat, on your former beat, that I would love, I'm sure a lot of others would love to hear about. And we're going to go through a lot of those issues, the Afghan and Iraq drawdown of troops, the incoming Biden administration, the future of foreign policy in America, and perhaps a bit of a renewal of American leadership as lots of folks see it. So welcome today. And I'll get right to it and say, Afghanistan and Iraq, we heard the announcement from the president. With less than 2 months to go, he wants to draw down to 2,500 troops in each country. So I guess my first question, other than your general reaction, is that, how possible is that in a safe way to draw it onto that number? What would we expect a number like that to do if we even know what their mission is? And where should things go once January 20 hits and it's a new commander-in-chief who can give a whole different order?
Well, great questions, Kevin. It's great to be back with you and Defense One, but it's also great to be at the Global Forum, the Suphan Center. Look, I think we're experiencing the difference between what the commander-in-chief can do versus what the commander-in-chief should do. And these decisions are being made truly in the 59th minute to midnight in this administration. The whole issue about whether the election will ultimately result in a new administration, I think that's settled now in everyone's mind except just a few folks. And so the decisions with respect to the force drawdown in Afghanistan and in Iraq, I think first we have to wonder whether that's going to create some kind of instability in the programs that both of our commanders there were leading and shepherding. For example, what does this mean for NATO and our NATO allies? Did we confer with them? And my guess is that we didn't. What does this mean for the large number of American contractors? What does this mean for the NGOs that may find themselves uncovered in the context of the security that within which they've operated in the past? So it isn't just a matter of 2,500 troops coming down. It's a matter of the entire international presence that's there, and have we in Afghanistan destabilized that presence? Have we destabilized the mission? This is ahead of schedule. It appears to be, as was explained, an intent to fulfill a campaign promise from years ago. I think most of us believe at this point that we are so far into this administration, or put differently, we're so little time left in this administration, that we question whether this was to fulfill a campaign promise or to foreclose options of the Biden administration. In Afghanistan, happily, we're at the very end, and maybe at the end of the traditional period of time called the fighting season. And so the period of time of the winter, and it will coincide with the beginning of the Biden administration, will give us some time, some breathing spell to figure out what this precipitous drawdown means, what it means for our NATO allies, what it means for the American contractors that are there, and the international contractors and the NGOs and so on. What does it mean for the Ghani government? And what does it mean for the intra-Afghan negotiations? Now, there has been some progress in those intra-Afghan negotiations, and we've seen that begin to unfold. But look, the Taliban, I think we can say, those of us who know them can say that they're completely unreliable in the end. And the group that we've been dealing with there doesn't speak for all of the Afghan Taliban. And so just the basic requirement by the United States that the Taliban must divorce the Al-Qaeda, that's not coming to fruition. And the American agreement with the Taliban, which theoretically set the conditions for the intra-Afghan negotiations, I think it remains to be determined whether they're going to be true to that and ultimately true to the intra-Afghan negotiations. So much remains to be determined here. And my fear is that we potentially could destabilize both the mission and the talks and ultimately the Afghan government by a precipitous departure.
Bottom line, do you believe that this was a purely political decision or has any merit in ground conditions?
There's no merit to this. None. Look, we've got a new administration coming in. I think that administration is going to look at the peace agreement. It's going to look at the progress of the intra-Afghan agreement or the intra-Afghan negotiations that are going forward. And the more of these kinds of consequential decisions that are made late in the Trump administration breaks up the continuity that would normally occur from one administration to another. It forecloses options that the Biden administration might have had or opportunities the Biden administration might have wanted to take. So I believe it's political. It's not. There was no tactical, operational, or strategic merit to doing this with such a short period of time. And in fact, it's not even clear, given the fact that these troops have to be out a week before the inauguration. It's not even clear that the laws of physics will permit that to happen. So, once again, just as we were stampeded out of Syria a couple of years ago by a unilateral decision by the president, we may find ourselves appearing to be stampeded out of Afghanistan. The good news, of course, is we have a great commander there, great leadership there, and they will do their level best to work with our partners, to work with the Afghans, to try to make this as seamless as possible. The question then becomes, what will the Biden administration do in reaction to it? I will simply tell you, it's very difficult once troops come out to put troops back in, and we'll see what that would do if he even contemplated that.
Yeah, the physics of it. I reminded me of the end of Iraq with a different time, a different size or scale of war. But it's not just people that have to come out. There's a lot of things and intelligence, enablers, and all. One thing I wanted to follow up on. You mentioned the peace agreement. One of the criticisms is that the United States, their leverage for peace was the presence of U.S. troops, and we weren't supposed to draw down anybody until the Taliban lived up to their end of the bargain. So right. you agree this doesn't help?
No, it doesn't. Look, the Taliban have been, we've seen this from them forever. They've been waiting for us to depart so that they could take full advantage of the absence of, first, an international presence that could hold them accountable, and second, the potential weaknesses of the Afghan government itself. And you've heard me, Kevin, you and I haven't talked about this, but I've been quite public about this. One of the areas where I think we really failed in the U.S. Taliban agreement was that we really left the women of Afghanistan exposed here. This may be an issue that ultimately figures prominently in the intra-Afghan conversation, but we know that the Taliban have no specific interests in forwarding the rights of the women in Afghanistan or women in civil society or civil society at all. And we wrote that off in our agreement, and it's not going to play, I think, with any real measure in the intra-Afghan negotiations. And if we are clearly on our way out, the opportunity for that to be leveraged is much less, particularly if we draw the U.S. Embassy down as well. That's a very important mission to us, and the U.S. Embassy and the drawdown of the U.S. forces within the international command really undercuts so much of what's going on in Afghanistan now.
Well, look, last bit on Afghanistan before we move on. There's a lot of reaction to the news that's actually, it's about time. It's overdue. The wars, these are the endless wars theme. You know that theme from the campaign trail. It's popular on the far right and the far left, frankly, and a lot of people that have long experience with this war who have gotten tired of it and don't believe it anymore and want to walk away. So what is your advice to the Biden administration come day one? Should they reverse this move and stick with it, or should they reconsider something else?
Well, first, I'll be very clear that I don't favor forever wars either. I hate that term because, a lot of our troops have given their lives in these forever wars. And you know what? They didn't have any choice in the matter. Those decisions weren't made by the generals. Those decisions were made by political leadership. And so forever wars, when they look at the military and say, you got to get out of those wars, that to me is a cop out from the political responsibilities they had to solve these things. Second thing is, I'm not proposing that we stay in Afghanistan forever. We had an agreement that we entered into that would ultimately reduce our numbers to something very small, if at all. But look, we have to recognize that the Taliban were the platform from which international terrorism struck the United States and others of our partners. And if they are unwilling to divorce themselves from Al-Qaeda, as was part of the stipulation in the U.S. Taliban agreement, then we're going to have to pay close attention to the outcome. So at this juncture, it would appear that even if we executed the Trump-era Taliban agreement, our numbers were coming down in any case. So those Americans who want us out, we're coming out. And all of us want to get out of this eventually. But the question is, do we destabilize all that we have sought to put in place? Do we undercut the government of Afghanistan? Do we undercut Afghan women? Do we undercut our capacity to protect ourselves against terrorism if we come out so precipitously that, in fact, it destabilizes the campaign, destabilizes the Afghan government, and just makes it almost impossible for the intra-Afghan talks to go forward, because the international presence in that country, which was really so much of what buttressed the Afghan position, the government of Afghanistan versus the Taliban, it's been undercut and in many respects leaves them vulnerable. So no one's arguing whether we should come out or not. The question is, we agreed to a downward slope with respect to our withdrawal. And if we're hastening that along just to put the Biden administration into a difficult situation and to remain faithful to some kind of a troop withdrawal that could have occurred years ago, but is now occurring literally, as I said, in the 59th minute before midnight in the Trump administration, that's just a political decision, I think, intended to put the Biden administration in an awkward position.
Okay, and so we can slide to the other side of CENTCOM. Iraq was the other part of that announcement, and I'm going to add Syria into it because when it comes to American leadership, probably the bigger criticism has been on the decision, as you mentioned earlier, to pull out from Syria mostly. And we had a little bit of news in the last couple of weeks too of Jim Jeffrey had an exit interview with Defense One, we'll plug ourselves, in which he said that they were playing a shell game. That was his phrase with the president, and hiding the actual number of troops going in and out of the country to keep it at some level above 200. At the same time, in all of these congratulatory messages to President-elect Biden, one of them came from the SDF commander, General Muslim, who said straight up, send troops back. They think they need U.S. troops there. What's the role for American leadership in Syria going forward now, both the ISIS war or the Assad state of Syria's future? And we can blend that into Iraq or talk more about Iraq next.
Well, all along the intent was that in the aftermath of the, I'll use the word defeat, but it's in quotes, I would say the defeat of the organized tactical units of the Islamic State. The purpose of the American troops in northeast Syria, which was never intended to be a permanent presence there, but the purpose of those troops was to create or to officiate, if you will, in the stabilization necessary to stabilize in the aftermath of the liberation of those populations, all the way from Raqqa down to Deir ez-Zor to the Iraq border. And those weren't many troops, about 2,000 troops or so, and they were really important to the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, in stabilizing that area and trying to bring back some normalcy to life, while the larger issue about the future of Syria was going to be decided. And of course, a phone call from Erdogan, the president, the next day announces the American withdrawal, and it really becomes a stampede in many respects. And we had this horrible image of Syrians throwing rotten vegetables at American troops who had days before worked closely with the SDF, and some of our troops had paid with their lives in service with the SDF to defeat the Islamic State and provide the basis for true stabilization that they hadn't seen in years. And now we're coming out because Erdogan wants to conduct military operations against the YPG. I don't know if we'll go back in. This is a decision clearly that the Biden administration must undertake. My guess will be that there will be probably a pretty thorough global force structure or force presence evaluation as one of the earliest undertakings within the Department of Defense. But we have clear interests in maintaining the stabilization of northeast Syria because of our relationship with Iraq and our relationship with Kurdistan, the PR or the KRG. So we have responsibilities there, and whether we put more troops in or whether we continue a shell game or not under the Biden administration, I think that there has to be a full eyes wide open analysis of what our troop requirements are in northern Syria, in the KRG, in Iraq writ large, in order to keep there being a flashback, if you will, of the Islamic State, and to provide the stabilization necessary for the Iraqi state to get on its feet after now a second major conflict.
Hearing you talk about, just to walk us through Syria, it's familiar to me, it's familiar to you, it's deep, it's complicated, it's not an easy decision. You know what it's not? It's not endless wars. It's not an easy catchphrase for Americans to latch onto and either oppose or support. I wanted to talk with you about the very notion of American desire for leadership abroad in places like Syria, in places like Afghanistan. Feel free to talk more, NATO, China, whatever it is. But the fact is, it's complicated. And some of this, some of these Pew polls and Chicago Council polls, if you ask Americans, should we have troops forward stationed abroad to defend against threats or deter? They say, sure. When you ask them, should we be in Afghanistan or Syria? Well, no. And because the way the evil dollar will put it is if Americans think it's for the United States benefit, they're for it. But if they think troops are just there to help build some other country, that's where they say no, especially if it takes a long time and if deaths and threats occur. So how much does that matter for an incoming administration or to a commander, maybe not to a commander, but to a political leader? How much should it matter what the American people are thinking and feeling right now versus where leaders need to take them or should take them?
Well, an individual like Joe Biden, I think, President-elect and soon to be President Biden, is well known for being able to do both of those things, both to have a full and comprehensive understanding of the security environment in the world at large, our strategic environment in which the United States has to be relevant in the 21st century, but also to be closely attuned to the will of the American people. And as you say, Kevin, very well, the polls would seem to indicate that Americans want to be engaged overseas, but often find fault with engagement in particular locations. And I don't fault the American people for that. What I would say is we the leadership, those who are engaged in having to make these difficult decisions about the deployment of American forces potentially in harm's way, have to do a better job in explaining exactly why we would need to have 2,000 troops in northeast Syria or 2,500 troops remaining in Iraq for some period of time, and explain why that's important. And explain exactly the successes that we've had. Undeniably, there was success under the Trump administration in dealing with the Islamic State. It was largely a follow through on the work that President Obama and Vice President Biden had undertaken. But that was a success in many respects. But we failed, I think, to capitalize on the ability to explain it to the American people in terms that meant something to them. So when we understand that the American people and the United States is most consequential in the world when we are engaged, those points of engagement need to be explained. And that's what the responsibility of our leadership needs to be. And we've got some areas where there are difficult times ahead. What's going to be our responsibility, or what's going to be our engagement in the war in Yemen? What's going to be our continued engagement in Iraq? Given the intent by the Iranians ultimately to dominate Iraq in so many ways. What's going to be our long-term engagement in northeast Syria and in Afghanistan? and in East Asia in a number of places. We have an obligation to explain these points of engagement as parts of an overall strategy for engagement so that the American people can have confidence that when we spend the treasure, but very importantly, commit the blood of America's daughters and sons overseas, that they have an understanding of why that is important.
I think we're in our last 5 to 10 minutes, and I wanted to ask one of the areas Americans are being asked to care and be engaged in international security is China, and one of those big issues is 5G. You've done a lot of work on AI and technology as a new frontier. Maybe walk us through a little bit, again, thinking to the future of what we should expect in a new administration, what you'd like to see about how to get Americans involved in that concern in a way that's maybe different than either China's the new public enemy number one, or we don't care about China, when right now we've written a lot about it this year, and it's the NBA doesn't buy into it, and Mark Cuban doesn't necessarily buy into it. Google, Facebook, maybe, you never know, but Secretary Pompeo was out there saying this is a battle for the soul of the world. That's as he's putting it, for your soul. And it's even if it's just competition, it's that big of a deal. Do you agree with that phrasing, with that level of concern and sincerity? Sure. And do you think the American people are catching on and the world is catching on?
Well, I think, a couple of things. The U.S.-Chinese relationship for America, and I think for China, will be the consequential relationship of the 21st century. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The question becomes, how do we shape that relationship so that it is constructive, so that it is valuable to the United States and more broadly the community of democracies? And this is an area where I think the Biden administration has an opportunity for some great progress. This idea of a summit of democracies to bring together the aggregation of our commitment to human rights and our aggregation to the commitment to democracy, our aggregation to our economic relationships, but very importantly, our commitment to an aggregation of our technological achievements, because so many of the democracies are also quite advanced technologically. And if we're not careful, this strategy of trying to decouple the Chinese from the global economy or from the advances of technology, we got to be very careful about creating an environment where the Chinese are able to undertake a completely indigenous development of its own technologies. And the bifurcation of technology in the 21st century, I think, will be a very dangerous outcome. And technology is going to play very, very importantly. In fact, the advance of technology may well be the platform on which geopolitics will unfold in the years to come, whether it's in the context of supercomputing as quantum computing comes online. The enormity of the capacity of quantum computing has yet to be fully explained to the American people, certainly, and I think more broadly the community of democracies. The enormity of the capacity for artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology. These are all technologies that are moving very, very quickly. The Chinese are pursuing their own routes in these. And the thing we can't afford to have happen is for multiple different platforms of technology to occur in the world. Because the idea of authoritative capitalism or authoritarian capitalism, which is the model that the Chinese are proposing, is quite attractive to segments in the world that would be very happy to maintain an illiberal system of government on their own, be supported by the Chinese, and be buoyed on the Chinese system of technology. We've got to be very careful about that. That doesn't mean, though, we can't have constructive relationships with China, because there are some problems that we'll face in this world in the 21st century that can't be solved if the United States and China can't find a cooperative way forward. We're living through one right now, a pandemic, and the global economic downturn that could ultimately create opportunities for China vis-a-vis our partners economically that we would never want to have happen. There are issues associated with climate where we can find the way to cooperate. But we have to recognize that China will be a competitor. But we have to manage that competition so it is not just a strategy of confrontation. I don't know a lot about many things, but I know a lot about the movement from confrontation to conflict. We've got to be very careful that we manage competition to take advantage and to harvest opportunity from it, but not permit competition to ultimately be nothing but perennial confrontation, because The distance from one to the other is a short distance to conflict, and it's quite slippery. So the United States has got to embrace, and I suspect under this administration we will, a commitment to science, a commitment to technology, a commitment to invest in that and to harvest the enormous capabilities of America's technical companies and those of the community of democracies, so that we have a very solid way forward in the 21st century for technology on our terms, not on the Chinese terms.
Well, I think your message is, from what I hear, well received on both sides of the aisle here in Washington and among the national security leadership. Like we said, the question is, will the American people beyond our world pick up on it?
Sure.
It is a new world coming forward. We got a couple months left before we get a new president. John Allen, thank you very much for joining us at the Global Security Forum, especially with the last minute switch pitch hitting assignment that you received. I know you're a busy man, and we greatly appreciate your thoughts. It's always good to talk to you.
Great to see you, Kevin. And my very best wishes ultimately to you and to the Soufan Center, but also to Chris Krebs, who couldn't be here today. I wish him the best for his moral courage in taking the stands he has.
Great. Thank you, sir.